Right, so first of all I want to share a problem, and the problem I'm going to share is that this is not as planned. The reason is that two people who should be sitting on this panel with me have COVID and they aren't here. One of them has managed to do a video, which is fantastic, and the other one is just not here. So we've modified things a little bit. I'm going to speak for a few minutes at the beginning, which I didn't plan to do. Then I'm going to hand over to Rose Gilroy, who's the Professor of Planning for an Ageing Population at Newcastle University, and she's on video. She'll speak for a few minutes as well. Then I'll hand over to Fiona Brown, who is the Executive Director of Neighbourhoods in Sunderland, to talk about some fantastic best practice that's going on in Sunderland. By the way, Rose will talk about some new best practice that's going on with respect to new application of for homes for the elderly, indeed multi-generational homes. And then myself and Fiona and Jeremy Porteous, who's very kindly agreed from Housing Lynn, who has and who I've been working with now for the last year and a half in the context of the TAPI inquiry, and I'll explain what that is for people who weren't there this morning. Jeremy and Fiona and I will answer any questions that you have in the context of future models of housing. Now, first, let me check. Was there anybody here who listened to me this morning? Right, not everybody, so that's good. And I apologise to the people who were there this morning, because I'm going to say a little bit of what I said then. But it's useful to embed. Okay, it's useful to embed. Right, so I'm Roy Sandbach, and I am totally inexpert in this context. However, last year, Jeremy Porteous asked me if I would chair an independent panel into the use of technology for housing for an older population. And I said I would. And I didn't quite realise how extensive that would be. I mean, I am, after all, retired in theory. And however, it was an unbelievably enriching experience. I'm going to share a little bit of the lessons learned, all in the context of future housing. These are the three things that we learned. If you want to read the report is on the Housing Lynn website. It was funded by Dunhill Medical, who are now taking us to the next level of this TAPI inquiry. And we learned these three things. First of all, that people need to be at the heart of everything that we do. And one big problem we have with older people is that this is not a homogeneous group. We all know that, don't we? The problem then, and this is true in the context of housing infrastructure, and it's equally true in the context of the sort of softer bits of what people do for living at home, that it's very heterogeneous. So I'm nearly 68 and my mother is 93. We are both over 65. Well, it's unbelievable the number of people in every context who simply talk about the over 65s as if they're like one group. This is ridiculous. It is ridiculous, and we've got to stop it, right? So I'm enrolling you to stop that and recognise that in organisations, people always like to bundle things together. And in this context, we can't bundle things together. We have to talk to people as individuals. We have to personalise. And that takes time and effort. The problem we've got is that the processes and the silos that exist in the context of housing and care and preventative activity and independent living and health, God me, you know, the health. These silos are overwhelming. They prevent interactive, collaborative innovation, but it's worse than that actually. What they do is they slow down and they stop the user being brought into the conversation, because there's so much conversation going on in organisations inside. It's debilitating often in organisations, and there often, and I'm going to suggest that there should be more of this, there often isn't what I term communities of practice, where the user, the individual is at heart, and the application and benefits are brought by experts from across the system. Now, many experts say, oh, I don't have time to talk to all these people. Well, I actually think that's complete garbage. It's important to get the user in the room, and it's important to talk to people about the user across disciplines. Now, the other thing we all often say, this is particularly true in the public domain, by the way, and I've got a background in the private sector, is that we wait for policy. How ridiculous, Roy says. All right, I'm just saying it's absolutely ridiculous to wait for policy. You can make a difference at every level. And what we found in this TAPI inquiry is that certain principles could be applied in everyday work, in every function, in every place where people and housing and care are being worked upon. Nothing's to stop you doing that. No policy position, no white paper. God knows we've had white papers. I mean, how many white papers have we had in the context of this over the past 10, 15 years? Not just in care, by the way, but in housing. I mean, it defies belief. I could anyway. What I think is that we can apply some principles from the bottom up, and I'm enrolling you. You probably don't realise that, but I'm enrolling you, I'm recruiting you to apply these principles. Our inquiry, the TAPI inquiry into technology for older people, identified these things which were crucial to the way in which we help people live better, longer lives. Remember, that's what we're doing. We're helping them live better, longer lives. In the context of technology, what my wish for the world is that a chart like that is on everybody's desk, is in everybody's on everybody's smartphone, iPad. It's in every conference room where the conversation is taking place about ordinary people who want to live better, longer lives. And that's true, by the way, in bits of councils and bits of operations which are not directly related to this. And here I'm thinking particularly of the finance community. They should care as much as anybody in this room cares about doing the right thing for people. Elected members in councils, government, they should care about these principles applied. Now, principles are one thing, and you can certainly do this stuff from bottom up, but equally what we need is delivery. Innovation, new stuff, in my experience, ideas are cheap, but delivery is expensive, and delivery is difficult. And innovation is nothing without delivery. So the question was for TAPI, we've got these great principles, we can enroll people in applying them, but really, don't we want to have some great exemplars so that we can roll out best practice across the whole community, wherever it might be? We can replicate it or scale it. Replication, by the way, is often better than scale in this context. I'll leave that just thought. Now, in order to do that, Dunhill Medical have very kindly agreed to take the TAPI work on further, to isolate some demonstrators where the TAPI principles will be applied in the context of housing for older and vulnerable people. And you can learn more about that on the Dunhill Medical site, on the Housing Lynn website, and on the TSA site, I'm sure. Now, in that context, there is already some best practice taking place. And unfortunately, we don't have some people here who would talk to that, but we do have some insights that are on video from Rose Gilroy, who runs the Future Homes programme. She's at Newcastle University, but it's a multidisciplinary, a multi-agency engagement, and she's going to talk to us for about 9 minutes, I think, on video. So can we switch that on now? Can we? Yeah. Talk among yourselves. I hope everybody enjoyed last night. Everyone enjoyed last night? Yeah.
Good afternoon, conference, and I hope everyone's enjoying the experience of the TSA. I'm really upset I can't be with you, but on Friday, I had a really strong red line on my COVID test kit, but with the benefits of technology, I'm able to give my presentation. What I want to do is to talk about the Future Homes Alliance, which is a project I started in 2016, and I want to tell our story within the framework of housing that cares for people. So our first question might be, what is care? What does it look like in the context of housing? And if we turn our attention to health, we might say the answer is rather poorly, because we are a nation of aging people. We are a nation of home owners, but 1/5 of older people who are outright home owners live in housing that's failed decent home standards. 1/4 of older outright owners have no savings, and 18% fall below the poverty line. And I would suggest that there's a fair bit of overlap between those circles. So people are living in housing that isn't costing them any money, but is costing them a great deal in health. And these problems rock up at the door of our hospitals. So why can't we invest in health by upstream investment in our housing? Does our housing support us to make good choices for ourselves in later life? And the answer is increasingly no. Our housing is getting less adaptable because it's getting smaller. And as I've said at many a conference, we've been terribly easy to fool because we don't know the size of our housing. You can go to somewhere as diverse as India, as China, as the United States, and people will tell you they live in X square meters or Y square feet. But in this country, people will tell you they've got 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, as if that means something. We also know our housing isn't even paying attention to basic accessibility standards. Hence the situation that some people who might fall, break a hip, and have limited mobility simply can't go home. And one of the problems is, of course, that in England, at least, we're under the thumb of about 12 developers whose care for us is because we line their pockets, let's be honest. And we fall for them into 3 groups. We're either young professionals who want high-rise apartments, or we become family formers, so we swap the city centre for the suburb, we swap the apartment for a house with a bit of garden for the kids. And then later on, we become older people who want something that looks institutional, as we see in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, having worked on older people's housing issues for more than 2 decades, older people are massively frustrated about the poverty of options that actually capture their preferences. So, frustrated by all of this, I had what I can only describe as an Elvis Presley moment, deciding that what was needed was a little less conversation, a little more action. And guided by people like the excellent Roy, I invited people by name to come and have a larger conversation about housing, drawing on what is called the quadruple Helix Model. And the idea behind this is really quite simple. There might be bright people working for you, but to be honest, there are bright people working everywhere. Wouldn't it be great if we could break down these silos, these institutional barriers, and bring people together to consider the issues that we all think are important? And I should tell you that in my business cohort was a representative of the top architecture practice in Newcastle and someone from a well-regarded local housing association. And at the end of our first meeting, we decided that we would build We felt we had words coming out of our ears, so we didn't want to research. We wanted to build. And we wanted to build housing not for older people, but housing in which we could grow old, housing that flexed around our changing needs, because life, as we know, happens. We wanted to build in a way that was meaningful to urban sustainability, because that's another element of care. How do we care for planet Earth and its limited resources? And how can we inform both of these agendas by digital innovation? And these principles have become enshrined in the Future Homes vision. Having committed ourselves to a new process in the quadruple helix, we wanted to continue that commitment through co-design. So we began our design journey with workshops held with health professionals, occupational therapists, workers who support adults with visual impairment, and those who work with families who have a child on the autism spectrum. All of these professionals had very strong ideas about what a supportive, caring environment might be, and none of them had ever been asked their views by an architect, with the expectation that their ideas might be taken forward into new design. We then followed with workshops with older people, with parents of young children, with housing middle managers, with a kitchen designer. We held day-long workshops ourselves as the Future Homes Alliance, challenging ourselves to bring these ideas together into a coherent whole and come up with a set of guiding principles. And these principles were to develop housing that is mixed, not targeted at single life course groups, but 1 and 2 bed apartments and 2 and 4 bed houses that respond to single people of all ages, people with children of all ages, people living as extended, not just nuclear families. And within those dwellings, having flexible walls that says that, we change over time. Why can't our dwelling? And we are working to create and sustain community, because community is another way of providing care for ourselves in a place that looks out for people. And I think we've all learned a great deal about that through COVID-19. We take a fabric first approach to our housing so that we make our housing, if you want, into little T-poses. And whatever heating we put in, we input very little. Supporting physical and mental health by creating space for children and adults to socialise, and for food growing, which can help reduce poverty and certainly does an awful lot for food miles. Providing easy to understand technology so that people can make informed decisions about the energy and water they are using. Having plug and play sensors that support people's health and well-being. And finally, as a registered business, which we became in 2018, developing a model which is replicable and viable. And it doesn't end there, because you might say, is this going to be the best housing ever built? No, it's going to be better, but there's much more to do. Will we make mistakes? Well, almost inevitably, yes. But we will learn from the hard data that streams from our dwellings, and we will also learn from the experiential reviews with householders, who will all be tenants. We'll have a small number of units which are leased to industry actors, so they can test out different products and services and get live feedback from the households who live there. So, to sum up, I want to leave you with some bigger messages. If we want to get better outcomes, we need better processes that open up to more voices. And I would commend to you the quadruple helix model that Roy can talk about much more eloquently than I can, because it brings people together. It allows people to step out of the boundaries of their own institution. And there are huge opportunities in a time of demographic change to work with older people, to work with many people, because housing is a shared concern. It's something we all are invested in. And finally, let's commit ourselves to openness, to being lifelong learners, to accepting the possibility that we can get things wrong, but pushing forward always the boundaries of what is possible. So conference, can I thank you for your attention?
Right. I think you'll agree that some of the things that, can you hear me? Yeah? Some of the things that Rose was talking about are obvious, but often just don't happen. And this quadruple helix is quite crucial. I should say that the program that Rose has talked about is fully supported by the local council, the university, businesses, and crucially, by the way, businesses who are interested in housing as a purpose and not just housing as a return. And my personal view, and I was asked a question about house builders this morning, and it's about time house builders recognise that purpose is as important as the sort of delivery of little boxes, because those little boxes are no good for people. They might think they're good for people, but honestly, they're kidding us. They're not. And I think we need a sea change there. That's happening in Newcastle. Planning is agreed, okay, and building is happening. And these will be test beds for action. Now, I'm going to hand over to Fiona Brown, who's going to talk about some things which have already started to happen in the context of Sunderland. And I should say, Sunderland has a Healthy City 2030 strategy as a city, and it has an Ageing Well strategy as a city, and it has an Ageing Well board made up of the quadruple helix and more. And that is a model which is being brought to bear on exactly the things that Fiona is going to talk about. So Fiona, over to you, and thank you very much. Her colleague Graham Scanlon was supposed to be here, but he's not here with her. So over to you, Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Thanks, Roy. So note to self, next time you share a platform with Roy, make sure that you haven't got your over 65 homogeneous numbers that he's asking about. So ignore slides 4 and 6, Roy. So thank you very much for being here this afternoon. My name's Fiona and I'm the Executive Director for Neighbourhood Services with Sunderland City Council. And within that portfolio I have housing, but also the statutory role as Adult Director. So just a little bit of introduction, and I have to admit I'm on a bit of a mission in Sunderland, and that mission is really to try and get the narrative around adult social care reversed. We start very much from a position of that it's a real drain on the public purse. Well, actually, from my perspective, I think it's a real opportunity to identify the economic driver that it is. It is actually one of the largest growth sectors in the economy in the UK. If you look at the North East as a region, it is the third largest contributor to GDP. It is a huge sector, and what we need to do is think about that as an opportunity and not about a drain on resources. And just a slight example, we've just done an economic report as a group of regional directors of adult social care. And one of the things that we found is that for every £1 you invest in adult social care, you get a return on GVA of £1.96. And on occasion that is bigger than some of our largest physical infrastructure programmes in the region. And we don't think about it like that, we think about it as a drain. So how we started in Sunderland then, so how do we use that as a shift to the narrative, and how do we use that as an opportunity rather than as a negative? So we started with the data and we mapped out the need for housing across Sunderland for the next 10 years. We also looked at care needs, and we also looked at what tech was available. And we took that down to ward level. So for all 75 wards in the city, we know what that need and demand is for the next 10 years. We looked at frailty indicators to predict who would need any of those services from a preventative point of view. We looked at energy ratings on properties, and we're part of the Homes for Healthy Ageing test bed to look at how properties become damp. How do you monitor and how do you measure it? Because there are some negative impacts for people who live in damp properties. And we've overlaid all of that data with some health data as well. And Roy mentioned the Ageing Well board. We also have on that NIAS, which is our ambulance provider. They were saying that in Sunderland, 40% of their calls to people who are over 65 result in people not being, 40% are not transferred to hospital. So those 40% of people are either worried about a low-level health condition, are lonely or isolated. And if we could bring that data together, we could signpost better and save some money for the NHS as well. So what we're trying to do very much is start to predict the need and have those conversations on a multidisciplinary team basis. As a city, we're also investing in 5G connectivity across the piece. But I think for me, tech has to be seen as integral. It's got to be integral to our future plans to deliver what I consider to be blended tailor support. So it isn't the answer, it isn't a replacement, it's part of housing, it's part of support, and it's a means to allow people to be independent. But I suppose my own personal opinion is I think those three things together really starts to give us a game changer in the industry. And I say that from probably three perspectives. As a social worker, when you do your assessment, you're having a conversation with someone in a point in time and you don't have all the information to make an assessment for them. If we put in tech, we get a much better, richer picture and a level of data that enables us to put in tailored support for people. And a really nice example is a lot of older people are fiercely independent. When they're sat in front of a social worker, they will tell them anything they want to hear so they can remain independent. And what we do with social care is we then put a package in based on that information. And we then wonder why the outcomes aren't what we wanted them to be. With the tech, it enables us to understand that Mrs. Smith doesn't open the fridge 3 times a day. Mrs. Smith sleeps in her chair. But if that's her choice of a good life, we should be supporting her. So we've got monitors that can help look at what that behaviour patterns are. We've got abilities that if Mrs. Smith does like to fall asleep in her chair on a night, we've got dimmer switches that will slowly bring the lights up around 2 o'clock when she wakes up. We've got the opportunity that we can slowly raise the heating so she doesn't get up, she's cold and she's falling. So there are lots of ways that we can use technology to actually get the outcomes we want for people. So for me, it's about that richness of social work assessment. It's being much more tailored about those commissioned services. But I think the real game changer for me is the family dynamics. So I'm sure we've all had aging parents or family where you've got your own life, you've got your job, you've got your family, you're rushing home to see them before you go home. The start of the conversation is very much adversarial. Have you had your medication? Have you had a drink? Have you been out today? Where actually, as a family member, we can program all of that into your phone. You could be sat having lunch. You can have a look at the phone. It tells you your mum's been up at 10 o'clock. She switched the kettle on 3 times. She's opened the fridge so she's eaten, and actually she's quite happy. So when you get into that family situation, the dynamic is much more positive. You start talking to your parents as individuals of, what have you done today? Have you had a good day? So that's how tech can really help us support individuals as well. So just a little bit of background about social care. So 9.3 million hours of home care are delivered in the North East, and that's gone up by 20% during COVID. Our growth in population is going to be around 3% by 2040, but people living with dementia is significantly increased. So it just starts to build a picture of that demand that's coming at us. And actually, as we've said, or people have said previously in the conference, we can't continue to deliver services in the way that we're delivering them. We just haven't got the capacity or the capability. We also have something like £119 billion per annum that informal carers save the economy. On average, 20 hours a week from individual carers support their family. Now, on the one hand, that's a saving to the economy, but we'll come on to a lovely story about James and James's mum, who stopped working when James was born, and she was an NHS nurse. So again, we've lost that resource to the economy as well. So housing delivery plan in Sunderland, as I've said, we've identified what we need over the next 10 years. We've been lucky enough to have a really supportive council. They have invested 59 million of our own capital money into a housing delivery plan. We have built our first council house in 40 years. Some of us are proud to say that, but I think some of us, that's a bit of a really, where have we been and why haven't we been doing that quicker? And we had our first tenancy in 20 years. So the actual housing delivery programme itself is based around 3 themes. We have quite a lot of empty properties in Sunderland, and we need to work hard with people to bring those properties back into use. You can buy a property in Sunderland, 3-bedroom, for around about £20,000. Now, for an investor in London, that seems quite a good investment, but you then have absent landlords that it's really difficult to work with. We also want to fill the gaps that the larger developers don't want to, so small infill sites for 3 or 4 bedroom, for 3 or 4 bungalows, which can be specially adapted. And we also want to look at over 117 units of supported accommodation, whether that's for people with learning disabilities or autism. Roy mentioned the city plan. We have three themes in our city. We want to be dynamic, we want to be healthy, and we want to be vibrant. And underneath all of that is our 5G plans to actually get that connectivity across the city. So the number of strategic boards we've mentioned the ageing well. We have a number of partners around those boards, and we're trying to run it, Roy and myself, almost as an action set. So we don't want to sit and talk to people. We want them to come to us and tell us how they're delivering the priorities within there. And because some of those conversations are happening so well, we're starting now to look at that housing provision for domestic abuse and to improve massively our pathways for homelessness in the city. So we became a registered provider in 2019. We became an investor partner with Homes England in 20. And by 2020, we had our housing delivery board, our housing delivery plan agreed by Cabinet, and we were good to go. So in quite a short time, we've set ourselves up with some really big ambitions within the city for housing. So we've talked about doing the right thing. We're working very much with SME providers within the city to help us do the build. We're working with filling in those gaps, but also our team's approach is bringing forward homes that are needed for specific client groups. And I have to say, I'm really delighted to say that our development team in Sunderland is all women. And I'm pleased Graham's not here, because it does cause him some concern every day when he's surrounded by women who are absolutely passionate about driving the agenda forward. So I just wanted to give you a few examples of what we've been trying to do as that collective across housing, social care and tech. Albert Place is in Washington in Sunderland. It was an infill site which we have built 4 properties on, and it already had planning permission. But we struggled massively with the market to try to get a developer to come in and build, because it just wasn't cost effective for them. So we did it ourselves, and we worked with a small SME. So we got 4 bungalows, built the full wheelchair standards, and we did that jointly with housing, adult social care. And SCAS is a 100% owned company which delivers care and support to people in the community. Key features are that it was 5G connected, fully tech enabled, but it enabled the early joined up thinking on allocations and care and getting the right people into those tenancies. And we also started to look at, actually, could we work with the community to put a piece of public art in every one of our facilities that we opened. And one of the things that really pleases me about this is the way that the community has wrapped themselves around these 4 individuals and supports them massively. So they know them when they're out walking in the community, they'll have a conversation with them, they know their names. It's been absolutely fantastic. So this is James and his mum Michelle. James is 27, and the thing about James is he's always lived with his family. He's never been independent. And one of the things that is the balance with that is James wants to be independent, but parents are a little bit concerned about how well he'll cope. And actually, it's just a really lovely story. Sorry, I said don't press it because it starts.
James was diagnosed with autism at age 2, and since then we've also discovered he has a learning disability. He has a specifically speech and language disorder as well, which means he understands and speaks around the level of a 4-year-old, and he also has a developmental coordination delay as well. But he really has islets of ability, so he's really good with technology. He's does have some language, and he is a really happy young gentleman, and we are so proud of the person that he's become. So I feel really blessed that we've had this opportunity. We've been planning James's transition for the next step for his life for a long time, and to have this opportunity, it's better than we could ever dare to hope for. When I walk in here now, this feels like a home, and I look around and it feels like his home. I've been very mindful that he's a 26-year-old guy, and what would a 26-year-old guy's house look like? And what we've also done is he's got things he loves, things he's passionate about, like a cartoon called Adventure Time, Futurama and things like that. So we've done things, we've decorated his home with all things that he absolutely loves. So it's just absolutely heartwarming, and it's just a huge relief too. James was diagnosed with autism at age 2, and since then we've also discovered he has a learning disability. He has a specifically speech and language disorder as well, which means he understands and speaks around the level of a 4-year-old, and he also has a developmental coordination delay as well. But he really has islets of ability, so he's really good with technology. He's does have some language, and he is a really happy young gentleman, and we are so proud of the person that he's become. So I feel really blessed that we've had this opportunity. We've been planning James's transition for the next step. I do a lot of James's oral hygiene at home, and I was very concerned in coming here about how that was going to look and how effectively he was going to brush his teeth. So with his dentist and I, we've got a new toothbrush, and it's an app that's attached to his phone and to the Alexa. And what it is that it has a picture of your teeth on the screen, and then James brushes his teeth and it colours the phone, the image on the phone, so you can see you brushed your teeth effectively, and it gives you a score every day. So it brings that little bit of a gaming element into it, so you try and beat your score every day. And that we found a massive difference of him brushing his teeth since we've implemented that, and that's such a relief for me. That just something it was such a worry, and it's just been it is sorted. So it's been amazing.
That was the one little piece of kit for me that really made his mum comfortable that James could go in his own home, and something like that on an app that he can see every day, clean his teeth, set himself a competition that he gets a bigger score every day, is just an absolute massive game changer. So I'm being hurried on by Roy, so I will move on. I know we don't talk about costs, but actually that saves us significantly on the bottom line for adult social care. £11,000 per week for 4 bungalows. It's huge, and you just think about if you get the tailored care right, we are going to see some return on that as well. Big thing for me, we talked about carers and their contribution to the economy. James's mum's gone back to work. She went back to our Nightingale Hospital in Sunderland, and she was giving out vaccinations. And she's gone on her first holiday with her husband for the first time in 27 years, just on the two of them. So she's so confident in what's happening in James's life. So just very quickly, that was the start. We've now, opposite those 4 buildings, there is an old school site, which we're about to turn into 15 bungalows for people with autism and learning disabilities. We've also got Cork Street, another part of our city, where we're building 17 bungalows, 5G connectivity. We have a web-based app that we've designed which gives us social health enabled information which helps people live independently, so we get it on a tablet, we can push data, we can use historical data, and we can make sure that people are getting the right care. And our final one is Willowfield Supporting Housing Village. Again, just mentioning the support we've had from the council. This is an old primary school site. There was an amount of money attached to it for capital receipts, and the council's agreed to put it into our programme at no cost. And what we're now going to have is a 16 million capital project, carbon neutral development, and 80 homes. And that's our biggest project so far, which is the Supported Housing Village. My next mission is to get an intergenerational project somewhere in the city, so fingers crossed I might just get there with that. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found that useful.
Thanks Fiona. I think the lesson learned there is this is interdisciplinary. This has a vision to it, and it can be applied, and it has the backing of the council. The elected members are behind us, aren't they? Not easy, but important. Now then, I was going to spend some time with Q&As, but we've run over now. However, it was very important for you to hear Rosa's work from the point of view of that quadruple helix in Newcastle, and Fiona's work, which is practical, community-based activity in a major city. There's absolutely no reason why we can't do that everywhere. Things like that everywhere, and I'm sure things like that are happening everywhere. Now, there are people in this room who've got government responsibility, and it's an interesting question to ask, what is the government's role in this? And I go back to the question about policy. There's a policy position that the government can take and a regulatory position that the government can take, but the thing that the government can do more than anything else is to act as strategic convener, to take this learning and best practice that a city like Sunderland has, and indeed other cities around and other environments, rural and urban around the country have, and to act as the strategic convener for best practice application, because that way we can get replication. And the people in this room can, in the context of tech and its application for older people or vulnerable people, we can lead on that without that that policy stuff, so long as government provides the strategic convening environment for us to do that, and gets out of the way and allows local activities to be shared and then replicated. Boy's view, by the way. I also think that the stuff that Fiona mentioned in the context of independent living, we've got a gap. We've got a national independent living strategic gap. A national independent living strategy does not exist. It should. We have a national prevention strategy gap. A national prevention strategy doesn't exist. We should have one. But there's nothing to stop us applying that in the context of cities or indeed urban environments. So I leave those thoughts just on the table for you to reflect on as you leave. We were going to have Q&A, so thanks Jeremy for sitting here, and thanks Fiona, but I think it's time for us to move on to the next part of the agenda. If you want to talk to us all, and indeed in the context of the further TAPI work, we're all easy to get hold of. And thanks for listening.